Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, diving right in today. We're tackling a pretty intense chapter of American history, McCarthyism and the Red Scare.
Ooh, yeah. A time of suspicion, accusations.
Like something out of a movie.
It really was. Our source material today, it's actually a lecture transcript meant for IBDP history students, so buckle up.
Oh, we're going deep then.
Deep dive, literally. We're talking about Hollywood blacklistings, a senator claiming to have a list of communists, and even atomic secrets.
Okay, now you've got me hooked. I know bits and pieces about all of that, but how did it all actually play out?
That's what we're here to uncover. What makes this period so fascinating, beyond just the drama, is how it reveals how fear and politics can twist together.
That they feed off each other.
Exactly. And our source also touches on different historical interpretations of these events, which adds another layer.
Oh, so we got to think critically about the information. Love that. Okay, so to set the scene, it's post-World War II. Tensions are rising between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. They went from allies to rivals really fast.
Yeah, and the U.S. is deeply worried about communist influence spreading at home.
Which, to be fair, was happening in other parts of the world.
True. And the U.S. already had anxieties about this stuff even before the Cold War got going. Look at the Alien Registration Act of 1940.
What was that?
This act made it illegal to advocate for overthrowing the government. Can you believe that?
Whoa. So the groundwork for suspicion was already there.
You could say that. And then when the Soviet Union became the enemy, well, those existing fears just exploded.
So people were primed to believe the worst.
Exactly. Ready to see communists lurking everywhere.
And that's where the House Un-American Activities Committee comes in, right? HUAC.
Ah, HUAC. They were tasked with rooting out suspected communists. And guess where they set their sights first?
Hollywood, right. With all the glamorous actors and writers.
You got it. HUAC's investigations in Hollywood had a massive impact on the industry. Think of the Hollywood 10.
I've heard of them, but refresh my memory.
These were screenwriters and directors who refused to testify before HUAC. They were blacklisted, unable to work, some even imprisoned.
All because they wouldn't answer questions.
It's a chilling example of how fear can trample on individual rights.
Makes you think, how far is too far when it comes to national security?
It's a question that still resonates today. This idea of security versus freedom.
Totally. And then, just to make things even crazier, there's the Alger Hiss case in 1948.
Oh yeah, Hiss was a former State Department official.
So high up in the government.
Right. He was accused of being a Soviet spy.
Was he?
There wasn't rock-solid proof for the spying charges, but he ended up convicted of perjury. And a key player in that was a young congressman, Richard Nixon.
No way. Nixon was involved in all of this.
Early in his career, yep. Makes you think about how this climate of fear shaped his whole political path, doesn't it?
It had to have had some effect. I mean, did he truly believe in the communist threat, or was he just playing the game?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But regardless of his motives, Hiss's conviction had a huge impact on the public.
Like if someone high up could be a communist, anyone could.
Exactly. It ramped up the paranoia even further.
And then, as if things weren't bad enough already, 1949 happened.
Oh boy, 1949. That was a turning point.
What happened?
Two major events that really shook America. First, the Soviet Union successfully tested their own atomic bomb.
So they weren't just a political threat anymore, but a military one, too.
Exactly. It completely shattered America's sense of security and its technological dominance.
I bet people were freaking out.
You can imagine. The world felt very unstable suddenly. And on top of that...
There was something else.
Oh, yeah. Mao Zedong and his communist forces won the Chinese Civil War. The People's Republic of China was born.
So another major communist power on the scene.
And it felt like a direct blow to the U.S., like they were losing the Cold War and fast.
That must have fueled the search for internal enemies even more.
Absolutely. The feeling was that someone must be to blame for these setbacks, and suspicion fell on anyone who seemed even remotely sympathetic to communism.
Which brings us to Senator Joseph McCarthy.
Right, the man who gave his name to this whole era. 1950, he gives this dramatic speech, claims he has a list of 205 communists working in the State Department.
205. Did he ever actually show this list?
Nope, never produced any solid proof.
But people believed him.
He was incredibly skilled at tapping into that existing fear, and he was also smart about his timing. The Truman administration was already being criticized for not being tough enough on communism.
So McCarthy swooped in with these accusations.
Exactly. And even though he lacked evidence, his claims resonated with a public already primed to believe the worst.
It's amazing how powerful a claim can be, even without proof, if it taps into what people are already afraid of.
It's a lesson that, unfortunately, is still relevant today.
So what happened next? Did people just take McCarthy's word for it?
Not entirely. But his accusations did trigger a wave of investigations and trials, many of them lacking fairness and due process.
So innocent people were caught up in this.
Sadly, yes. And the fear spread beyond the government. Schools, universities, even labor unions felt the pressure.
It's like the suspicion was contagious.
That's a good way to put it. McCarthyism wasn't just about finding communists. It was about creating a climate of conformity, silencing anyone who dared to disagree.
That's scary. People were afraid to speak their minds.
Absolutely. They were afraid to express any opinion that could be perceived as remotely sympathetic to communism. Even questioning McCarthy's tactics was risky.
It's a classic example of how fear can be used to erode freedom.
And to fully grasp how deep this went, we need to talk about the role of the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover.
They were involved in all of this, too.
Oh, yes. Hoover and the FBI were deeply invested in this anti-communist crusade. They used wiretapping, surveillance, infiltration, all sorts of tactics.
To find communists.
Or anyone they suspected of having communist ties, which raises some serious questions about the balance between national security and individual liberties.
Yeah, spying on your own citizens, that's pretty intense.
It definitely highlights the dangers of unchecked power, especially when fueled by fear.
And then there's the case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. I remember learning about them in school, accused of being spies.
The Rosenberg case is a heart-wrenching example of how far things went. They were convicted of espionage in 1951, accused of passing atomic secrets to the Soviets.
But was the evidence against them strong?
There's still debate about that to this day. But they were executed in 1953, despite pleas for clemency from around the world.
Wow. It's a reminder of how high the stakes were during that time.
And how fear could distort justice. The Rosenberg trial became a symbol of the excesses of the McCarthy era.
It's wild to think that one senator's accusations could set off such a chain reaction, reaching into every corner of American life. And we talked about Nixon earlier, how he got his start in this climate.
Right. His staunch anti-communist stance, especially his role in the Alger Hiss case, really positioned him to benefit from the anxieties of the time.
So McCarthyism helped shape his political career.
It definitely played a part. It's a reminder that times of fear and uncertainty can create opportunities for ambitious politicians.
So how did this all end? Did McCarthy just keep going unchecked?
Well, you could say he got a taste of his own medicine. In 1954, he went after the U.S. Army.
The Army? What, did he think they were all communists too?
He accused them of harboring communists, which led to the Army-McCarthy hearings. And here's the key. These hearings were televised nationally.
So everyone could see what was happening.
Exactly. For the first time, the American public saw McCarthy's bullying tactics and baseless accusations on full display.
It's like the wizard behind the curtain was exposed.
Precisely. People saw him for what he was, a bully using fear for his own gain.
So public opinion turned against him.
Big time. And it all happened so fast. It shows how a single event, like these televised hearings, can shift the narrative.
It's the power of transparency, right?
Exactly. When people can see for themselves, they can make their own judgments. And in the end, the Senate censured McCarthy in December 1954.
That's basically a formal slap on the wrist from the Senate, right?
Yeah, a public reprimand.
Yeah.
It marked the decline of McCarthy's power, and the Red Scare began to lose steam.
So McCarthyism eventually faded, but it left a mark, didn't it?
A deep one. McCarthyism cast a shadow over American society, and its legacy is complex. The damage to American political culture, to trust in institutions, it was significant.
It's a cautionary tale about what happens when fear runs rampant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Careers were destroyed, reputations ruined, and countless individuals lived in fear of being labeled a communist, whether it's true or not.
It's a reminder that our freedoms are precious and we need to be vigilant about protecting them.
Couldn't agree more. And our source material touches on the fact that there are different historical perspectives on McCarthyism.
Oh, interesting. So not everyone agrees on what it all meant.
Exactly. Historians have debated this period for decades. There's the Orthodox view, which sees McCarthyism as a flawed but necessary response to a real communist threat.
So from that perspective, McCarthy was trying to protect America, even if he went too far.
That's the gist of it. Then there's the revisionist perspective, which argues that McCarthyism was more about political opportunism and exploiting anxieties than a genuine threat.
So using fear for personal gain.
You got it. Then there's the post-revisionist view, which tries to find a middle ground. It acknowledges both the legitimate concerns about communism and the excesses of McCarthyism.
So a more nuanced take.
Exactly. And finally, there's the New Left interpretation, which emphasizes the social and cultural impact of McCarthyism, how it stifled dissent and reinforced conformity.
Wow, so many ways to look at it.
It goes to show that history is complex. There's rarely a single, easy answer.
It's all about perspective and understanding the context.
Exactly. And that's why these deep dives are so important. We get to explore those nuances and challenge ourselves to think critically.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into McCarthyism, what's the big takeaway for our listeners today? Why should we care about something that happened so long ago?
Because history, in a way, repeats itself. The patterns we see in McCarthyism, the manipulation of fear, the erosion of trust, they're still relevant today.
It's like a warning from the past.
You can say that. It reminds us to be critical thinkers, to question narratives, especially when they play on our fears.
And to be wary of anyone who benefits from sowing division and suspicion.
Absolutely. We need to be vigilant about protecting our freedoms, like freedom of speech and thought, because once those are gone, it's hard to get them back.
It makes you wonder, are there echoes of McCarthyism in our own time?
That's a question worth pondering. Are there situations where fear is being exploited for political gain? Are we seeing similar attempts to silence dissenting voices?
Those are some heavy questions.
They are, but they're important ones to ask. By understanding the dynamics of fear and manipulation, we can be better equipped to recognize and challenge those patterns in the present day.
So knowledge is power.
You got it. The more we understand history, the better prepared we are to face the challenges of our own time. It was like the curtain was pulled back and everyone saw the truth.
Yeah, the man behind the fear-mongering.
Exactly. People started to question him, and support for McCarthy dwindled rapidly.
It's amazing how quickly things can change when people get the full picture.
Transparency is so important, right? It allows people to form their own opinions, to think for themselves.
So what was the final nail in the coffin for McCarthy?
Well, the Senate censured him in December 1954.
Officially reprimanded.
Yeah. It was a public condemnation of his actions, and it effectively ended his reign of terror. The Red Scare started to fade after that.
McCarthyism lost its grip on America.
It did. But it's not like everything just went back to normal.
There was lasting damage.
Absolutely. McCarthyism cast a long shadow over American life. The political landscape was changed, and not for the better.
Trust was broken, I imagine.
Yeah, trust in institutions, in the government, in each other. It was all eroded. And the effects of that lingered for a long time.
Makes you wonder, what if things had gone differently?
It's a thought-provoking question, isn't it? How would America be different today if McCarthyism hadn't happened? Or if it had played out in a different way?
These deep dives always leave me with more questions than answers.
That's the beauty of history, isn't it? It's not about memorizing dates and names. It's about grappling with complex issues and understanding the forces that shape our world.
Speaking of complex issues, our source material mentions that there are different historical interpretations of McCarthyism.
Oh yeah, the historiography of this period is fascinating. There are at least 4 main schools of thought, each offering a different perspective on McCarthyism and its legacy.
Tell me more about these different views.
Well, you've got the Orthodox view, which basically sees McCarthy as a hero, albeit a flawed one. They argue that he was fighting a real communist threat, even if his methods were sometimes questionable.
So they believe his heart was in the right place.
Yeah, they emphasize the context of the Cold War, the genuine fear of communist infiltration that existed at the time.
Okay, so what about the other perspectives?
Then you've got the revisionist view, which takes a much more critical stance. They argue that McCarthyism was more about political opportunism and exploiting public anxieties than about any real threat.
So they see him as a manipulator, someone who used fear for his own gain.
Exactly. They point to the lack of evidence for many of his accusations and the damage he inflicted on innocent people.
So 2 very different takes on the same events.
Right. And then there's the post-revisionist view, which tries to bridge the gap between the orthodox and revisionist perspectives. They acknowledge both the genuine concerns about communism and the excesses of McCarthyism.
So a more balanced approach.
You could say that. They try to see the nuances, the complexities of the historical moment.
Okay, and what about the last perspective?
The New Left interpretation. They focus on the broader social and cultural impact of McCarthyism, how it stifled dissent, reinforced conformity, and created a climate of fear that extended far beyond the government.
So they're interested in the long-term consequences.
Exactly. They argue that McCarthyism had a chilling effect on free speech and political activism that lasted for decades.
It's amazing how one historical event can be interpreted in so many different ways.
It shows that history is not just about facts and figures. It's about how we understand and make meaning of the past. And it's a reminder that there are always multiple perspectives to consider.
So after diving deep into McCarthyism, what's the key takeaway for our listeners today? Why should we care about something that happened so long ago?
Because McCarthyism offers a powerful lesson about the dangers of fear and manipulation, and how easily those forces can undermine our freedoms.
It's a warning from history.
Precisely. It reminds us to be vigilant, to question authority, to think critically, and to defend our rights.
And to be wary of those who seek to divide us and exploit our fears for their own gain.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. Thanks for joining me.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep questioning, keep exploring, and stay curious.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.